One of my favorite things to do with furniture is to transform it into something that looks completely different. This painted cedar chest makeover is exactly that, and it fed my soul. It took a few different turns until I finally landed on something that I absolutely love. Let's dive in. Here's what this cedar chest looked like before. Outdated, with an absolutely dirty cushion. But I thought it still had some good bones. First things first, I took it all apart. Okay, not all the way apart, but I removed a lot of the things. I threw the pad in the trash and busted the trim stuff off of the lid. I honestly thought this was going to be easy, just unscrew the screws under the lid, but they were glued on too. So, after I unscrewed all the screws, I had to pry them off of the lid too. For some reason, I love doing stuff like this. I love seeing something completely change in a matter of minutes. I'll also note here that I removed the lock from this Lane cedar chest the minute that we brought it home. Unfortunately, these automatic locks have resulted in some major tragedies, so if you have a cedar chest, specifically a Lane cedar chest, those locks really need to be removed. After the stuff on the top was gone, I flipped it over and removed the bottom. I removed the screws that held it onto the cedar chest, just to find out that that was glued on too. So I used a hammer to pound them off. And guess what I found? You know how people always talk about how amazing Lane cedar chests are? Well, I got gypped. This one is mostly made of MDF with very thin wood veneer wrapped around it. See that stuff that looks kind of like compressed cardboard? That's how I explain it anyways. That's MDF. After this, I inspected more of the cedar chest and just found more MDF and more veneer. Even the cedar is just a thin veneer. Anyway, after I removed the bottom, I removed the hardware on the fake drawers. And I removed the trim that looked like a vine for those leaves. Here's what it looked like after all those things were removed. Down to almost bare bones. Except now I had to fill all the holes, the damage that it left behind, and I had to fill in those leaves. I just filled everything in with my favorite wood filler, Quickwood. It's my favorite way to fill hardware holes in, so I started there. Typically, I would have filled in the damaged veneer on the top with Bondo, and probably would have filled the leaves with Bondo too. But I already had the Quickwood out, and it was cold outside. I really don't like using Bondo inside because it is so stinky. And then I realized that I never cleaned it. So I cleaned it all off to make sure there weren't oils or gunk that would make my paint not stick. After an hour, the Quickwood was dry, hard as a rock. So I sanded all of that Quickwood down flush with 150 grit sandpaper. The leaves were a challenge, but I was able to cut a foam sanding pad in half to fit it into the piece of the trim, and then I sanded away. I also took this opportunity to sand everything lightly with a fine grit sanding pad just to help the paint stick. Then I cleaned up all of the dust. But there were a few spots that I didn't fill it very well, so I put a light coat of the wood filler on to fill in those little areas, especially on the leaves. When that was dry, I sanded it all back down and cleaned the dust again. It looked pretty good to me, so I moved on to my next step, which was the primer. Yay! One step closer to the paint. I sprayed 2 coats of clear shellac all over the outside, letting it dry between coats for at least an hour, and then overnight after the second coat. You all probably know that I love spray clear shellac before I paint. It prevents stains from the wood from ruining the paint job. It helps the paint stick. It's a magical product. The next day, I was ready to paint. I tried out House and Canvas chalk style paint in the color Underground. I've heard great things about it from Katie Scott, so here we are. Do you follow her? If you don't, you really should. Her furniture makeovers are so inspiring. Anywho, I brushed it on with my favorite $10 Zebra round paintbrush. Straight out of the can, because I've heard that it is self-leveling. So I didn't add any water to my paint like I normally do. It's definitely not as thick as regular chalk paint, and I love that it's not as thick. This round brush made painting around all of the trim so much easier than just using a regular paintbrush. It still blows my mind how a round brush makes it so much easier to paint furniture than a regular brush. And I love this color of paint. Here's what it looked like after the first coat was dry. And then this is when I realized that there were a bunch of nail holes on all of that trim. And I just couldn't let them stay like that. So I filled them all in with some wood filler, let the wood filler dry, and sanded the wood filler down. While I had the sander out again, I sanded everything down. You know that I hate brush marks in my paint, and there were more brush marks than I wanted. So I took this chance to sand those down. And then I had to clean all of the dust off again. And since I sanded all of those places back down to wood, I sprayed another coat of clear shellac and let it dry overnight. And then I painted the second coat on. And I may or may not have painted a third coat on the top because it didn't have full coverage where I sanded so far. Isn't that color so pretty so far? After that coat of paint was dry, I moved on to the top coat. This paint is a chalk style paint, so it's very porous and matte. So a top coat is required. This Varathane polyurethane is my favorite and is always my go-to. And the easiest way to make it look good is to spray it on. Since I have a paint sprayer, I put it in there. But for beginners or for those who only want to paint one or two things, Minwax polyacrylic in a spray can might be for you. That is my favorite spray can top coat. So I sprayed on a coat of water-based poly, and even though I tested out the sprayer before I sprayed too much. Can you see how white the surface looks? That's when you know there's too much and it's going to drip. Instead of letting it drip all over and dry like that, I grabbed a small paintbrush and brushed the excess off. It still left a little bit of the top coat behind and a few brush marks too, but it sure beats trying to fix dry drips, right? Here's what it looked like after that poly had dried. Then I lightly sanded it all with 400 grit sandpaper and a fine foam sponge. I did it all by hand so then I wouldn't sand past the paint. And I really wanted to make sure the poly felt smooth everywhere. Then I cleaned up the dust again. And I sprayed 2 more coats of polyurethane, letting each coat dry completely between each coat. The cedar chest was then done, but I needed to replace the base. So I thought I would make a new trendy oak base for it like I did for that black dresser with the slatted wood drawers. I tried out a different design, used 2" by 2" oak for the legs and 1" by 2" oak for the supports, but when I got it put all together, I hated it. I really hated it. It looked so tiny and just did not look right at all. I did not do it very well. So I went back and forth about if I should buy more oak and try the design that I see most people do, or if I should do bun feet like I usually do. So I decided to just do what I know how to do. I went to Lowe's and I bought a few different kind of feet. I brought them home and tested them out. I even took some pictures and asked for your opinion on Facebook. And I feel like the majority thought the straight legs would be the best. But my heart just loves the turned legs. So I went with the turned legs. I actually attached these leg plates that I have used countless times on other furniture flips. I got them all on, tested them out with the turned legs, and then I remembered, really remembered, my biggest issue with them. Since they have this bump on them, the legs end up sitting almost like an inch away from the bottom of the furniture. And if you have them too close to the front or the side of the piece, you can see that gap. So I went on a scavenger hunt online and found the hardware that I've used once before to attach legs. And I impatiently waited for almost a week for them to get to me. In the meantime, I went back and forth about if I should paint the legs or not. And in the end, I decided to paint them. So I painted them all the same way that I painted the cedar chest. Clear shellac, brushed on the paint, sprayed on the polyurethane, sprayed too much polyurethane, had to brush the polyurethane away. The whole shebang. I did it all. Finally, the new hardware came, so I attached those. They were just as easy to attach as the other ones. I used a 1/2" drill bit to drill the hole in the middle, and then I drilled pilot holes for the screws to attach to the cedar chest. This hardware doesn't create a big gap between the furniture and the legs. It's so much better than the other ones if you have the right surface to attach to. You can get similar hardware without the spots to secure it with the screws, but I like the extra security of having the screws attach it to the furniture. Alright, before I share what it looks like now, please take a second to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps get our videos out to more people, so thank you so much. Real quick, here's what it looked like before. And here's what it looks like now. Is it even the same cedar chest? What do you think of this makeover? Let me know in the comments. It's not perfect by any means, but I'm trying to be less OCD about every single little detail. I just want to create and stop worrying about every little thing being perfect. Even still, it makes my heart happy to see the transformation. I keep staring at the before and after photos. This paint color is so good. The paint was good too. Definitely better than some chalk paints, but I don't know if I would say that it's the best out there. The paint did self-level somewhat, but not as good as like General Finishes or Paint Couture. Their color line is absolutely gorgeous though, and it seems to be pretty durable as well. Anyway, I'll see you next week with a new video. Thanks for the love!